Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Back at our normal time this week on a Monday night. Co-host Will Miles joining me right here after Florida gets blown out by Texas. LSU up next. We get to hear from Billy Napier today, so we'll kind of go through with that. But Will, is another disappointing performance here. Neither one, me or you, we didn't expect really Florida to keep this close. But it was a little worse for me in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, look, you coined the moniker, there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation. And for the most part, you're right, except for the second half against better teams, where we could just sort of check out at that point because the game's over. I mean, this one, 35-0 at half. The A&M game, I think, was 20-0 at half. The Miami game was, 24-14 or to 10, something like that at the half. Like, it has been a series of when Florida's played better teams, they've been down at the half. So I get it. I get all the injuries. Certainly at the quarterback position. I mean, my recap article barely even brushed on the offense, because we should expect the offense to struggle, and that's one of the things that we sort of expected going in, against the number one defense in the country. This was always going to be a struggle, but you don't expect a 3rd and 15 sort of a conciliatory draw to turn into a fumble that completely changes the game. You get the 2 tip passes that are interceptions. I mean, they gave up 21 points in like the last 5 minutes of the half there in that stretch where it went from 14-0 to 35-0. And look, I mean, even with DJ Lagway, if you're down 35-0, you're not coming back, but certainly with Aiden Warner, you're not. So a little bit of a dull second half, I guess, for most Gator fans, certainly for us as well. And, just sort of it would be nice to play like the Tennessee game and the Georgia. That was one of the things. After the Georgia game, we were both sort of like, well, at least it was exciting in the second half.
Yeah. And I told you, that was like the first time in forever. I know we lost and all that stuff, but at least I was having fun in the fourth quarter of that game for the first time in a while.
I mean, there were plenty of people who were having fun in the fourth quarter of this one, but that's because they started drinking at halftime. And it was brutal, man. Like, it was just one of those things where, all of the so Florida has had very effective players and have shot themselves in the foot, and that's been disappointing, like in the Tennessee game and even a little bit in the Georgia game, certainly in the A&M and Miami games as well. But this was one where they kept shooting themselves in the foot and their players weren't out there. And so the combination of those two things, all of the injuries taking their toll, which honestly is one of the things we always talk about and have talked about for years in terms of why the SEC is a tougher road to hoe than the ACC or even than the Big Ten, is this conference is just different and you feel it. And so, starting with Miami to start the year sort of means it's a longer year for Florida overall. And, they got healthy during the bye week and then bam, right afterwards, they laid everything out on the field against Georgia, kept that one close towards the end, not able to get the win. And then just sort of the wheels fell off on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So plenty to get into here. We'll hear Napier's thoughts on the defense. We'll take a deeper dive into the defense. Tight end use too. We'll get into that a little bit. Napier was asked about it. It was funny he was asked about it today because it was something I had noticed as well for this Gator offense. So we'll get into what Napier said about DJ Lagway and his availability today. And also, we'll go off the field a little bit. Napier does talk about his approach to the transfer portal, and we will get into a little bit of recruiting. Hey, Napier was asked about recruiting during the season by somebody, so he didn't shut it down. So the headlines, Florida did get a kicker commit today. We'll get into that too, but at least it was we'll talk about recruiting during recruiting season. So, at least there was something there for Billy Napier about recruiting. So everybody hit that like button if you're watching right now live, or if you're watching the replay. Really helps us out right here on Gators Breakdown. Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. If you want to keep the conversation going and get ad-free episodes of Gators Breakdown, join Gators Breakdown Plus. Link is in the description. Will, you alluded to it. You put out your kind of post-Texas article at Read and Reaction, and the main lesson from Florida's blowout loss to Texas. That's what it was called, and it was mainly focused on the Florida defense, like you said. Well, let's hear Billy Napier on Florida's defensive performance after watching the film.
I think on 7 of their touchdowns, 5 of them were guys not touched.
Correct.
Like, is that blown assignments on the back end? Is that lack of pass? Can you put your finger on common theme maybe?
Yeah, no, I think, all of those were a little bit of some communication errors, some missed assignments. And then I think just in general on the perimeter, I think we didn't tackle well. We missed tackles at inside backer. We missed tackles in the secondary. I thought we played with the wrong leverage on a few occasions. Just in general, just basic fundamentals, tackling, leveraging coverage. And obviously some of those guys, they're out there, they're playing different positions, whatever the case may be, but it is what it is.
Well, what it was, I think Sarkisian, Texas head coach, I think he had a plan of attacking, the Gators cornerbacks where Florida was, pretty far in the depth chart on the defensive side of the ball there at cornerback. But, I'm not ready to completely gloss over the issues on that side of the ball because of injuries. They had taken steps we thought to be a lot better. But because they had this played out, tackling effort was abysmal. Billy Napier mentions there on the perimeter, which, that includes the cornerbacks there that are, way down the depth chart, blown coverages by experienced players, no pressure up front where injuries aren't really a factor. I expected some issues due to the injuries, but I'm not going to fall back on it and not give Texas and Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian enough credit for, coming in and playing one of their best games of the season. Steps were taken on this defense earlier this season, Will, and we pointed, that the stretch coming up was the real test. And besides forcing turnovers and some short yardage stops last week versus Georgia, the last 2 weeks showed that there is still much more room for improvement on the defensive side of the football. Teams that can throw the ball still have an upper hand. And as you pointed out, Will, and something I was, of course, looking at too, this is a defense that is 103rd in pass yards per play allowed. That's, we talked about the steps being made, but when you look at it as a whole, still a whole lot of room to be made up here. And well, if we got a player grades versus Texas, and it kind of mirrors what Billy Napier was talking about here. And if you go to the lowest rated defensive players versus Texas on Pro Football Focus, linebacker Derek Wingo, 35.9. Linebacker Grayson Howard, 37. Linebacker Jaden Robinson, 39.1. DB Cormani McClain, 46.7. DB Jordan Castell, 48.5. Those were the lowest defensive players on Florida's defense, and it mirrors what Billy Napier was saying. On the perimeter, can't tackle. Inside backer, can't tackle. And it showed up right there. As far as the best go, the highest rated defensive players, edge TJ Searcy, highest graded defensive player from Pro Football Focus, had the sack on the first drive of the game. Edge Tyreek Sapp, linebacker Aaron Childs, edge Jack Pyburn, defensive lineman Joey Slackman. There was your top five there. Florida rotated a whole lot. The scenario of the game being a blowout, Florida got some of the guys out of there, let some of the other guys play. Also, because of injuries too, snaps got really shared in this game. But you look at the top five, Will, of the best players, and there was no really top impact there when you start looking at it. So it really does lend itself to what Billy Napier was talking about. The lack of tackling, the lack of communication really showed up. And when you want to look at grades of the game as well.
Yeah, it was one of those things where when one guy did something right, the guy right next to him screwed it up. And it starts with the second drive of the game for Texas, where they just leave a guy wide open going down the field for a touchdown. There was actually a switch release between the two receivers. So the inside receiver drifted to the outside receiver crossed over to the inside, and Jordan Castell and I believe it was Bridges. They both followed the same guy. And I don't know exactly what Florida teaches in those cases. I'm guessing because Bridges was jamming the receiver up tight, that's probably something where Castell needs to know that he switches off. But again, I don't know what they teach, and I don't know what the specific coverage was for them to be able to pass that off. But they don't pass it off. The guy ends up wide open, ends up for a touchdown. We can talk about the offense in some respects, and there is an impact there. Mm-hmm. I mean, Sarkisian goes for it on 4th and 1 from his own 24. because he had zero fear of what Florida's offense was going to be able to do with Aiden Warner in there. He
And
was willing to
and
turn
the
that.
play before that.
What you mean on like 3rd and 9 where he runs
Yeah,
for
right.
he runs
It's
for
3rd and 10,
8
he's
yards?
about to get sacked. It's 4th and 1, and yeah.
Well, look, let's not pretend Florida's defense is all that good at stopping quarterbacks who are running. I think what we're really seeing here is that this was a limited defense that got exposed against Miami, got exposed against Texas A&M, was able to kind of find a few things that they did well after that bye week. But they were also playing KJ Jefferson, and they were playing, Brock Vandegrift, and they were playing quarterbacks of that ilk. They come in, they play Carson Beck, who's going through just an unbelievable inability to not throw the ball to the other team right now. But still, we're giving up 6.5 yards per play, I think, by the time you get to the end of that game. So, again, like a 70th or 75th rated defense overall, where they wound up maybe even like 80th or 90th. And then they got absolutely blown off the field by Texas. So, look, I mean, Miami and Texas are probably the class of the teams that Florida has played so far, and especially at the quarterback position. And they've gotten absolutely blown off the field by Quinn Ewers and by Cam Ward. When they played Nico at Tennessee, okay, they were able to kind of hold their own. There were some guys running free deep, but Nico missed them, and they were able to limit what he was able to do. When they played Vandegrift for Kentucky, they were able to limit what he could do. But basically, I'm scared to death of what Jackson Dart's going to do to this defense. I mean, he might throw for 700 yards if Lane Kiffin decides he really wants to show Florida what he's got when he puts the pedal to the metal. And look, I mean, considering that Florida used to put up 60 or 70 points against some of these teams when Spurrier was in town, I can't say that I blame them if some of these programs want to lay it on Florida at this point. But there's just no resistance on the defensive side of the ball once they're playing against teams that have better talent. And once the quarterback can find a guy who's open, the guy is open. And, there's a guy open on every play. And I think what we found is that guys who lock onto their first read or guys who are inaccurate or those sorts of things give Florida a little bit of leeway to be able to have the screw up and still be able to maybe get off the field. And in this game, this was one where they had the play to George Gums where he dropped back and Ewers hit him right in the chest and he doesn't come up with the interception. Now, look, it would have been a good play because, he's a defensive lineman, obviously, and he's sort of dropping back as the pass is thrown to him. But if Gums gets that one, maybe the tenor of the game changes a little bit. But the reality is once Florida didn't make that play, once they didn't get the turnover, at that point, it was like a knife through butter, man. It was just 40 yards, 30 yards, 60 yards. And there was a play I diagrammed in my post-game recap where Jordan Castell, who's gotten a lot of criticism for this one, and deservedly so in many instances, they had set up a screen pass to Isaiah Bond perfectly. And Castell did an awesome job of taking on the outside defender. And basically, there were two guys to block, him and Bridges. And Castell went in and blew them both up, to a point where Bridges had a one-on-one with Isaiah Bond on the outside where he really should have probably been getting blocked. And he just comes up and completely whiffs. And it's not that he doesn't make the tackle. It's that Bond didn't have to slow down as he went past him, which means the pursuit can't catch up. And I think, honestly, if I was going to point at anything when it comes to Florida giving up big plays, it's that their defensive backs specifically do not slow down the offensive player to allow there to be any pursuit, and the guy's just gone. Like the minute he puts his foot in the ground and goes past, he's gone. And you can see that when you look at the numbers. Florida is now 128th in the country. They've given up 53 plays of 20-plus yards. And, like middle of the pack there is 39. So I was looking up LSU today. They're 63rd overall in the country. They've given up 39. So Florida's given up 14 more plays of 20-plus yards than the Tigers, and the Tigers' defense is bad. So, like, you start thinking about, like, bad SEC defenses, and Florida is just way worse than those. And, look, if you're giving up 7 plays of 40-plus yards and 19 plays of 30-plus yards over the course of the first 9 games here, not a surprise that you're 4-5. We all knew it was going to be a struggle with this schedule, but they haven't been able to get off the field against better teams, and we saw that again against Texas.
Yeah, I mean, it was something we really chronicled during the bye week, of, all right, here's what Florida played. Yes, the defense has made strides. Yes, they've been better. this is what's coming up, and this was going to be more of a litmus test for the jump on defense. Finally playing quarterbacks. That's what we were looking at. It was you didn't play quarterbacks, you were playing running teams. Bye week comes Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. Go plays a lot of good quarterbacks in a row, and now I think we're seeing a little bit now the more true this defense, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's really you mentioned that the title of my article was the lesson or the main lesson learned from this drubbing by Texas. The main lesson is that Florida's defensive talent is not good enough, and that really is what we learned. Is that we can sit there and go, okay, well, if this guy does this or if this guy does this, who's the game changer on the defensive side of the ball? Who can come in and the other team has to game plan for that guy? Who is the guy where they go, oh, you don't want to throw it to that side of the field because that guy is going to completely lock down our corner. Like Jason Marshall had a very nice year before he went out with an injury, but he wasn't that guy. LJ McCray, true freshman, 5-star guy, probably has the tools to maybe be that guy someday. He's not that guy right now. Guys like Searcy, guys like Des Watson, guys like even Pup Howard, who's been very good this year. None of those guys are guys that you game plan around. There are a few of them that you game plan towards, but there's nobody that you actually game plan around. And until Florida has some guys on the defensive side of the ball that you actually have to account for, that you actually have to game plan around, this is going to continue to be a problem. And honestly, you can say that. I mean, when is the last time Florida had a guy on the defensive side of the ball that you had to game plan around?
Jonathan Grenard.
Yeah. And look at what Florida's defense was that year. It was like top 15 in the country. And that's good. I actually probably would have gone back before Grenard, but that's a good one. He is the last time he had to actually game. A guy who could win a one-on-one battle and could be extraordinarily disruptive while doing it. And you think about the Florida defenses of yore. I mean, even when you had Tease Tabor out there, and then you had Quincy Wilson on the other side. I mean, pick your poison, man. It was like
in that same time frame, Fowler, up front. So you had to worry about somebody up front and behind him that you had to game plan. Basically, it was hard to game plan because you had a pass rusher coming from Fowler and two good corners to go along with him.
Yeah, well, and you had Marcus May at safety. Yeah. You had Keontae Neal.
Yeah.
You just had you had Dominique Easley and Sharif Floyd there in the latter years of the Meyer era. Like, there have been just unbelievable guys who are really, really, really good football players who were folks that the NFL was salivating over. Who's the NFL salivating over right now? Maybe Howard, maybe Shamar James. And you're talking about our linebackers getting completely boat raced in this one.
This was a bad game. The misdirection of Texas. Yeah. It was a bad game for linebackers.
But part of that is, and look, I think I'm loath to defend the linebackers because they haven't been good for years now. But part of that is that when the defensive line can't get any push,
sure,
and when the defensive line doesn't get any penetration, like there are so many times where you'll see Florida has something set up, and they're just not able to get it to work because there's immediate penetration, like that the fake handoff reverse toss. Florida tries that, it's getting hit 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, right? Yeah. Like, you have to be able to hold up against the defensive line to be able to have a play that has that much misdirection. Now, it was a really unique play,
right? And
it was something where I'm like, well, shit, I don't even know where the ball is right now. But so I mean, hats off to Sark for being able to put that together. But that is a play where if Florida has a defensive lineman who shoots a gap and is 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, one, we don't even know what the play is, and two, because the quarterback running back mesh point's getting hit, and the other part is like it turns into a turnover or a big tackle for loss or something like that. Again, I mean, that's the other thing that was completely missing yesterday is there were no tackles for loss, nothing other than the one sack on the opening drive,
one sack and one pressure the whole game.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Quinn Ewers felt comfortable back there after that. And the other thing was, and this I think is the scarier thing for Florida going forward, is against Beck, they recognized that if they did some unique things to be able to get some pressure on him, that he'd start seeing ghosts and he'd throw the ball up. And they ran a lot of the same blitz packages in this one. I'll have to go look at the actual statistics, but it felt like Florida blitzed a lot more in this one than they had been prior to the Georgia game. And, I think the game plan was we got to create turnovers, we got to create havoc, we got to get the backfield. That's the Austin Armstrong defense. Hey, we're going to sit back in two high safeties and not let the big plays kill us. That's sort of been the Ron Roberts influence. And to be honest, with the talent that they have on this defense, that Roberts influence is the one that needs to win out, unless you have a guy like Beck, who, if you let him sit back there against two high safety looks, is going to pick you apart. But if you can get in his face, everything will speed up. I think they maybe thought they saw that with Ewers over the last few weeks. He's really struggled this year, but they made Ewers look like a Heisman candidate. I mean, 5 touchdowns, just average like 10, 11 yards a throw. Like, he looked awesome.
Yeah, and kind of going back and seeing what Georgia looked like against Ole Miss. I mean, we saw like Georgia's offensive line is struggling. I mean, this is not just a bad Georgia offensive line. This is just a bad offensive line in general. Their offensive line is nowhere near what you expect. And now you've seen Florida pressure, like you said, pressure Beck, able to get pressure on him. He turns the ball over. See it again versus Ole Miss, and they're a really good front. So, I mean, maybe you go back to last week and you see an avenue of why Florida was able to affect a passing quarterback like Carson Beck, but not so much Quinn Ewers and his all day to throw.
Well, it does make me wonder whether I should go put a couple of bucks on the Ravens to win the Super Bowl because, Todd Monken apparently is a miracle worker with offenses. He was able to get Stetson Bennett to win national championships and go up and down the field. And
Lamar looks better. And Lamar looks better as a passer too.
Well, I mean, the guy's won multiple MVPs with. Well, I guess he won the MVP last year, so he had won one MVP without Monken there. But I mean, that guy seems to know what he's doing when it comes to coaching offensive football. Maybe we can hire him to be the offensive coordinator at Florida next year. That'd be kind of fun.
There you go. Well, here we go. We'll keep it going. That's it for the defense right now. We'll kind of work back our way around it just a little bit, kind of going to the transfer portal part. Will was connecting that in his article, but we're here for Billy Napier about the transfer portal too. But Night of Faith puts a comment. I wonder if DJ Lagway will return for LSU. Well, Billy Napier was asked about it today, and here's the update. Quote, good thing is we worked him out this morning and felt good about what we saw. So now, does that mean he's 100%? I don't necessarily kind of pause there. Soft tissue is a very subjective issue. I think it's day to day, but we do anticipate him practicing today. So practice last week as well, very, very limited practice setting. Trying to do everything he could do to play. Look, if it was up to DJ Lagway, he would have trotted out there to play versus Texas. But people stepping in, making sure you get the right time here. I'd say it's going to be pretty close. Will, I mean, you heard Billy Napier's comments before the game as well, saying he might even be in there in an emergency scenario, only to not even see him in pads on the sideline. So I don't even know what that really meant. But Lagway was doing everything he could possibly do last week to get on the field to play for Florida. If I had no inside information right here as of this moment on a Monday night, if I had to, I'm pure guessing here. I just want to make that clear, pure guess. I think he gives it a go versus LSU. Obviously, we got a few more days to kind of figure out and gather some info here. Of course, it was leaking out last week about him being, practicing before it kind of come out. The news did come out that it wasn't as bad as we thought when we saw him carted off versus Georgia. But then we started getting some more information before they kind of confirmed that he was practicing last week. So if I had to guess, I think he'll be out there against LSU. And man, he's needed. Will he's absolutely needed if Florida's going to get the upset here. How much different will this team look versus LSU? Certainly the storyline here. A game and an opponent Florida must be healthy for to get the upset. Napier also said they're hopeful to get back guys like, with Lagway, with Badger and Damian George, Montrell Johnson back for the offense. So, if this defense is going to play like it has the last couple of weeks, and, we're going to have to get some players back on offense to get that upset versus LSU.
Yeah, well, none of this matters if Lagway's not playing. I mean, Aiden Warner, bless his heart. We're in the South, so we can say bless his heart. We know what that means. But went 12 of 25 for 132 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, QB rating of 76.4. Somehow his QB rating went up because overall for the year, he's got a QB rating of 68.3, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions, averaging 4.6 yards per attempt. You look at Lagway, he's averaging 11.6 yards per attempt. And that's actually, even if you take the Samford game out, he's averaging 8.9 yards per attempt. So any stat you look at for Florida from an offensive perspective is completely buoyed by DJ Lagway being there. They're 38th overall in the country in yards per pass, but that's all because of Lagway and all the explosives that he's hit all throughout the year. So, I mean, look, Lagway may not win the game against LSU, but Florida has zero shot without him being out there.
Correct.
And so, unless there's somebody in his camp saying don't play, I suspect he's going to be out there just because this is Florida's shot to get win number 5 outside of the Florida State game, which you expect them to be able to get that one. But if they're going to get bowl eligible, if they're going to get to 6-6, if they're going to accomplish at least that goal, this is the one, because Ole Miss is really good. And we've talked about the limitations on defense, and I don't think they're going to be able to stop Ole Miss. And so even with Lagway in that one, I think they may struggle. This is one where LSU, you start looking at the underlying statistics. I've been talking about this for 2 or 3 weeks now. The LSU's underlying statistics, whether you look at EPA or you look at the different rankings that you have for teams, even FPI, those sorts of things, LSU is not as good as their record would indicate. And that's what we saw against Alabama the other night. This is not a great Alabama team, but they took them behind the woodshed. And that's sort of, LSU is a team that can be gotten, especially because Garrett Nussmeier has not been great at the quarterback position this year. You look at what he's done so far. QB rating of 139.5, yards above replacement. My stat that tries to measure running and passing has him negative for the year. Now, I mean, the caveat there is those are essentially the same numbers that Quinn Ewers had coming into the game against Florida this week, and Florida made him look like a star. Florida made a backup quarterback look like a star for Texas A&M. Florida made Cam Ward. The Ward's been good all year, but certainly did nothing to slow him down either. And so it's entirely possible that Nussmeier comes out and completely lights up this defense, but it's not the same as having a guy like Ewers who's led a team to a national or to a playoff, to a national playoff. Like Nussmeier is taking over for Jaden Daniels, and honestly is dealing with some of the same problems that Jaden Daniels did last year, except he's not as good as Daniels. And so
that's what it is. They can't run the ball anyway. Jaden Daniels, remember, he was their run game last year.
He ran for like 1,200 yards.
Right. And like you said, it's pretty much the same issues. He can't work himself out of it like Daniels could.
Well, I mean, Daniels was an elite quarterback. Like, not like, oh, he was good. Not like, oh, he barely won the Heisman Trophy. Like, that Heisman vote wasn't even close. And it shouldn't have been close based on the statistical look. Now, granted, about 9,000 of those yards that he had last year came against Florida. So we do need to keep in mind that he absolutely obliterated Florida last year. But Daniels was a transformational type quarterback. Nussmeier is not that. Nussmeier is an okay quarterback who, a QB rating below average right now. 21 touchdowns, 11 picks. If you're only going to average 7.6 yards per throw, you can't be throwing 11 picks. DJ Lagway has 6 touchdowns and 5 picks, but he's averaging 11.6 yards per throw. So the explosion is there. That's where Florida's getting the points. And that's the difference between last year's LSU's offense and this year's LSU offense. Is last year they were explosive beyond all get out. Now, I think Daniels only threw like 2 or 3 picks too, but they were so explosive, especially going down the field, and that has gone away. Now, the problem there is that Florida's defense is not good against the pass. So it's the old immovable force meets the immovable object or whatever it is. I can't remember what that phrase is, but from wrestling back in the 80s. But someone's going to have to win that battle, and so Nussmeier is either going to look like a Heisman level quarterback, or Florida's defense is going to look really good because of Nussmeier. And I don't know who's going to win it. I suspect it'll be a little bit of both, that LSU will hit some big plays and be able to put up some points, which means exactly what I said earlier, is you need DJ Lagway and you need him to play in the worst way, because Aiden Warner is not going to be a guy who's going to be able to put up 24, 31, 38 points. And that's probably what it's going to take. I mean, 24 to bare minimum to win this one, but probably more in the 31 to 38 range. And a limited Lagway is going to give you some of those opportunities, even if he's not 100%.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, Will. I think if Lagway plays and say he plays good and and he's able to play good. And we won't know even if he's out there, we won't know just how healthy he is. I mean, look, the thing you'd love, Marcel Reed, Jalen Milroe. We've seen what those two quarterbacks been able to do with their feet against Alabama, against LSU. Even if Lagway was 100% healthy, that's not his style, but he could put something like that together. Not quite at the Milroe level, but he could make some play with his legs. That's going to be limited this week. You have to imagine with the hamstring injury. But even out there, or even with him out there, that is Florida's chance. And I think if he's able to play good and he does play a good game, I think this is going to be one of those classic, crazy, insane Florida LSU games. And we've all known the storylines of Florida and LSU and how crazy these games can get. If Lagway plays a good game, I think, this is going to be one of those going late into the fourth quarter. There's going to be some ridiculous, crazy play that's going to happen in the fourth quarter for a team to win this game.
So you mean clock management and making sure you have enough people on the field might become important in this one?
Absolutely.
So two things. Awesome if it's one of those types of games. Like, I used to get upset that Florida would play these really close games with LSU every year and be like, why can't they beat them? And it's funny because when Les Miles and Ed Orgeron were the head coach at LSU, all the clock management and boneheaded plays and all that sort of stuff were on that side.
Yeah.
And you could sit there and go, I can't believe they did that. And now they get to point back at us and do that. But the first part is I'm bringing Max down for the game this weekend. And so it needs to be a barn burner. If it's over by halftime, he's going to be very upset. He needs the Gators to stay in this one just for him. The second part is what I said earlier in the episode about it was very clear that Sarkisian did not respect Florida's offense with Aiden Warner at the helm. And so you can take a chance, 4th and 1 from your own 20 or your own 24, wherever that was. Granted, he needed Ewers to get it to 4th and 1, but once they got it to 4th and 1, deep in their own territory, they decided to go for it. And you only do that if you don't believe that the other team has the firepower to take advantage. And so one of the things that Lagway does, even if he's not 100%, and even if he struggles at some point, especially early on, you still have to respect the fact that that guy is going to take some shots, that you have to play a real defense, that you can't sit there and just sit on all of the screen passes and shoot like a cannon every time a guy sort of flanks out into the slot or into the flat. Like, one of the things I didn't put in my article, but I pulled the play, was it was back-to-back plays. It was a third down play where Florida threw a screen pass to the outside, and the Texas defenders just shot up like a cannon, and Florida's blockers couldn't handle it. And then on the next drive, Texas threw a little swing pass, and Florida's defenders were like back on their heels. But a lot of the reason that we could talk about technique and other things like that, but one of the reasons they were back on their heels is they were afraid of Quinn Ewers beating them deep. And so they had to respect that deep shot. So then when he throws the screen, all of a sudden it becomes considerably more effective. I think, honestly, one of the things that may even be overlooked in all this is I know Lagway has been working really hard to get his hamstring healthy, but I do wonder how much time he's been able to spend, because he hasn't been out there on the field, looking at tape, understanding checkdowns, figuring out the intermediate stuff that really has been a weakness for him this week. When it's 3rd and 6, I have almost no confidence that Florida's going to get the first down when he's a quarterback. When it's 1st and 10 and they're about to run a play action, I'm like, oh, here comes a touchdown. But that is the next progression for Lagway, is figuring out, okay, it's 3rd and 6. They took away my 1st and 2nd read. I've got a check down over here to the left. Let me drop it down to Jaden Ball. Let me drop it down to Montrell Johnson. Let me drop it down to Jacoby Jackson and let them try to get the first down. And hey, maybe we end up with a 4th and 1, but at least we had an opportunity here rather than throwing a little floater into triple coverage and giving Will a heart attack. So we'll see. I mean, out of all the good that might come out of the hamstring injury, I do wonder whether tape study will be one of them, because Lagway now has real tape of himself against real SEC opponents where he can start looking and saying, what are they trying to do to take some of the things I do away? And he can go back and look at each of his interceptions. He can go back and look at the different things where he maybe struggled at times and go, okay, if I can fix that, they'll probably give him some of that. I mean, if I'm LSU, I'm sitting there, 2 high safeties, quarters coverage, zone underneath, and going, beat me hitting a guy in a window, as opposed to beat me deep with guys running against middle of the field close type coverage where you can
Just
sink
have a
two
deep-
seams and go for it.
Yeah, just be a defensive coordinator that says, you know what? All right, you're lining up 45 yards off the line of scrimmage.
It's like prevent the entire time.
You don't let DJ Lagway beat you deep. Well, hey, Will, on that note, and we'll get back to it right here. Hey, part of that could be Florida getting the tight ends involved. And that's something else that Napier was asked about today, and that was the use of the tight ends and how little they have been used as of late.
I think about that as well. I do think that we need to be a little bit more intentional. I think sometimes it's structure on defense, where the matchups are, what are the fronts, the protections, the pressures. Obviously, the coverage is a big piece of that as well. But we definitely want to get those guys more involved, and that's a big piece of the puzzle here in the next couple of weeks.
All right, Will. Hayden Hansen through 9 games has 9 catches for 145 yards and a touchdown. No catches in the last 3 games of Kentucky, Georgia, and Texas. Before that, he had his best game of the season at Tennessee with 3 catches for 40 yards. Arliss Boardingham has 17 catches through the same 9 games for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had 3 catches against Tennessee for 40 yards and a touchdown. So 4 catches total for him the last 3 games. Well, I went back and looked at it. He had 6 more catches through 9 games last season, and that was after starting the season with none versus Utah and 1 apiece versus McNeese and then Tennessee. Remember that middle stretch right there, Arliss Boardingham started getting the ball a lot more last year. He followed that up with 2, 2, 7, 5, 1, 4 through the first 9 games of last season. So a player, we thought could take another step this season. We haven't necessarily seen it. Now, obviously, the big change in the last 3 games was, Graham Mertz going down for the season. He would use the tight ends, and we saw it. He'd use them much more than we've seen the other 2 quarterbacks use it. Lagway versus Kentucky, hard to complain about that while the ball, is being pushed down the field for scores. But, with that all-or-nothing approach, the tight ends won't really get used like that. So then the last 2 games with Warner at quarterback, I thought we might see more of the tight ends in like a security blanket check down scenario, especially when, most of the completions are close to the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, so the tight ends are never your first read.
Right.
And I think one of the things that you're seeing is that these quarterbacks, whether it's Lagway or Warner, are not getting to read 2, 3, 4 in their progression. Graham Mertz got to his reads. In fact, the criticism of Mertz was that he went too quick, right? That he would give up on the deep shot and would start looking towards things that were closer to the line of scrimmage and would process it quickly. And in many ways, that's why Mertz was so accurate. It's also why he was effective at times, depending upon what the defense was giving him, but certainly struggled to stretch the defense vertically. Lagway does not struggle to stretch the defense vertically, but when he sees a guy with any sort of daylight streaking down the field, he don't want to throw it to the tight end.
Yeah.
That's a waste, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Is there were opportunities for him to hit tight ends at some point, at a few times on 3rd and 5, where, hey, that is the place where you need to go. Maybe even pre-snap, that's where you should go. That you're not that you don't need to be a hero. You don't always need to take that deep shot. Those are the things that he's going to learn as he's spending time out there. And I think, dialing back that aggression will actually be a good problem for Florida with Lagway moving forward. Warner's just so young. He was locking on to guys and you didn't see him do a lot where you could actually see his head move from one guy to another. I'd have to go back and look at all the snaps to see how often he did that. But, with as many times as he sort of hung wide receivers out to dry on screens, and Florida, one of the things that sort of surprised me was that Florida did not have a counter to that, where like they faked a screen to the outside and snuck a guy up the sideline, trying to get Texas to fly up for that.
And we seen the Marcus Burke touchdown earlier this year was.
I was expecting to see them do something early where they tried to take advantage of Texas's aggression and they didn't. And to me, that ends up being a symptom of having a guy who's just not ready to play right now. And we're seeing that. You even saw it during the broadcast. The Palmer's sitting there going, I think Florida, at one point he's like, I think Florida's going to the well a little bit too much here. They ran that crosser for DK and, they hit it for a big play earlier, but now Texas is all over it. And At one point, he said something like, "Yeah, when you got a young guy like this, you've only got 6 or 7 plays. You just run him over and over and over again." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the criticism of Napier even when Mertz was in there, but certainly with Warner in there, that's been a criticism as well." So the tight end usage is a symptom of young quarterbacks who do not get to a second or third progression. And, even if you think about the touchdown that Texas threw where their tight end was wide open down the middle, I bet you the tight end wasn't the number one read on that. I suspect that's one where.
Well, but that's an RPO, so.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I mean, still, I look at it and I go, all right. I mean, I can't remember the last time Florida had a guy 5 yards to the line of scrimmage that open, right? So, is that a quarterback recognizing it? Has Florida had a guy that open 5 yards to the line of scrimmage and they just haven't recognized it? Or is it that they haven't schemed it? It's probably a little bit of both, but I think, it's really hard for me to blame the tight ends for not being involved the last couple of games, just for two reasons. One is that you got to get to the additional reads to get to them. But the other part is Florida's struggled in pass protection overall, which means you got to start leaving the tight ends in to help block on those plays, to give the wide receivers enough time to be able to get downfield. And so that combination, I mean, I'm not anticipating huge numbers from Hanson or Boardingham moving forward. I think it would be nice to see them get involved. I think it would represent a progression in the quarterback play of DJ Lagway if he's in there. But I'd be surprised if that progression comes this quickly.
All right, good stuff. Will, I know probably for sake of time, we probably don't need to go into the detail. You put an article out. I had an episode out about the announcement last week of bringing Billy Napier back. There's not much more to say than what we've already said. We can't, even with a outcome like Texas and what, all the bad that happens, screaming fire Billy Napier really doesn't amount to anything right now after that announcement. So kind of like you said in your article, as I said too, now we can just move forward and how to attack it. And like you said, quote, "I'm going to analyze what Napier needs to do to turn things around, even if I'm holding my nose at the decision to keep him around." So, like as I said, you can all get all of our thoughts, everything we posted last week. No need to kind of rehash that. The transfer portal was part of your opinion here of trying to move forward a bit, of course. And look, we were told that last week. One reason for not buying Billy Napier out was to use this money to attack the transfer portal. That's supposed to be a big part of moving forward with Billy Napier. We'll see how that comes about. But Napier was asked about his approach to the transfer portal. Here's what he had to say.
The landscape of college sports right now, how much of that has to occur now during the season when you are trying to prepare for games? Are you already at a point where you're looking at potential guys who have a future in the portal, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is definitely a piece of the puzzle here down the stretch. I think the combination of early signing period and the portal window paired with November football and how competitive and important these games are, that is one of the more challenging things about college football right now. And I think every coach has expressed that publicly. So we have extensive, our personnel department is working around the clock. We have windows of time where we evaluate players every week. Just this week, I'll be up here Wednesday night. I'll be up here early Friday morning. Those are my 2 blocks of time each week. So those guys are grinding around the clock, and then obviously the coaches as well, and then that gets funneled to me. So, yeah, 2 times a week we have blocks for evaluating players, and what you're describing, it becomes even more, there's just more, whatever you want to call it, rumors or anticipation. I think some of that starts to ramp up in November.
Tamper. That's all I got to say. I know you're not supposed to do it, but we all know it happens. So I'm not. We're not going to dig our heads in the sand there. Will, that came on the heels of Billy Napier. He was asked about the quarterback depth, of course, and now Florida having gone to a walk-on, and Clay Millen is the 4th quarterback, and will he ever get a shot? We don't know. But it was coming off the heels of that. Billy Napier basically saying, he wants 4 quarterbacks. That's what he said last year when discussing the quarterback spot. But also, saying, we know we're going to have to hit that position in the transfer portal. And then he gave this overall arcing, kind of their plan. Meets 2 times a week for the transfer portal. Certainly glad to hear that. This new world of college football, yeah, we know players are going to be moving left and right, maybe even more so now before, I can see this transfer portal window will being pretty crazy because of maybe some of the restrictions that are going to be coming up with the transfer portal and, the revenue sharing. And is that going to cause some kind of contracts to be in place? And guys are now have to be held accountable and maybe have to stay out of school or, however that's going to work out. This could be the last time the transfer portal is as free as it has been. So we could see major movement here with the transfer portal. But certainly when you look at Florida, Will, I know you kind of went to the defensive side of it. And, of course, you mentioned it earlier, Florida just needs better players on that side. But you start looking ahead, and you brought up an interesting point is how do you weigh these last 3 games to close out the season? Like I said, we all want to go win these games. Is there a balance of getting guys ready for next year? And then you're going to have to hit the transfer portal for potentially a few offensive linemen because you could be losing a few. Defensive linemen, you're going to have to bring a whole lot of experience through the transfer portal there. You lose Chimere DK and Elijah Badger out of transfer portal or out of the wide receiver room. You're going to have to hit the portal there as well. Billy Napier already said they'll be looking for quarterbacks out of the portal too. You can get a kind of inkling already of we've watched this team through 9 games now of where Florida in just a month is going to have to start bringing players in.
Yeah, they're gonna. I mean, so you didn't even mention retaining their own guys.
That's true.
Who might decide they want to go someplace as well. Now, I mean, I think when you look at the defensive side of the ball, you can wonder how many of those guys you really want to retain. And I mean, there's some guys there that you wouldn't want to see walk, and there's a lot that Florida is going to have to do in the transfer portal. Certainly there was the announcement that one of the rationales for not letting Napier go was you can redirect that buyout money to the transfer portal. Duh, but I'm not sure that's something you necessarily want to say like out loud because you've kind of blown any kind of leverage you had.
Yeah, we had that conversation on the Gators Breakdown Plus Discord. First of all, okay, now everybody out there knows, okay, Florida's going to be quote unquote maybe desperate. And what about the players that are currently on the roster? Okay, we know you're going to go spend all this money on the outside. What about us guys on the inside that are already in orange and blue?
I mean, I don't know. The guys who are already in orange and blue have got to be getting tired of getting their butts kicked. So I would imagine that they would welcome guys who are going to come in, as long as it's not their position, right? That they would welcome guys who are going to come in and help them win. Look, Napier has one needle to thread here, and that is get a Jaden Daniels-esque season from DJ Lagway next year with a defense that is not putrid. And so we can talk about offensive linemen, and yeah, they'll bring in some of those guys. We can talk about, do they need reinforcements at wide receiver? Absolutely. But I think offensive guys are probably going to say, you know what, if the money's right, the offensive side of the ball with DJ Lagway, I'm in for that. Yeah. The question I have is what do you sell on the defensive side of the ball, given what Florida's defense has been for the last 3 years? I mean, this year is the best defense that Florida has had in the Billy Napier era, and they're 87th in yards per play allowed against FBS opponents. They're bad, and it's the 3rd year in a row that they're bad. So, 3 different defensive coordinators over those 3 years. They brought in all sorts of new guys. You think about the guys who were there 2 years ago, and now who do they have now? There's no more Rashad Torrance. There's no more there's no more the guys who were there as Napier or as Mullen holdovers. These are all Billy Napier's guys that he's brought in. The Asa Turners, the DJ Douglases, the Triquez Bridges, the Pup Howards, Shamar Jameses. The only guy left from Mullen at this point is Jason Marshall, and he was the best player on the field up until he got injured. And so what do you have to sell beyond the money is the thing that I think they're probably going to struggle with because yes, I want a great NIL deal, but if I'm a great player, like if I'm a player, like I was talking about earlier, somebody that people have to game plan around, I want someone who's going to get me the NFL, because it's not just the payout at Florida that matters. It's also the payout if you can get me into a 1st or 2nd round draft pick. It's the payout if you can put me in a situation where I get a good second contract in the NFL. It's a place where if I learn you have if I learn a ton, then I have now positioned myself to be really valuable at the next level. Those are the conversations that I would be having if I were a recruit trying to decide, or a transfer trying to decide where to go. Because the reality is that there are going to be other programs that have things to sell. Like if Dan Lanning comes calling at Oregon and says, I need you for my defense, what do you say? If Ryan Day comes and says, I need you at Ohio State, if Dabo Swinney finally decides to actually use the transfer portal and says, hey, I need you. Kirby Smart, obviously, you've got DeBoer at Alabama, you got Cristobal down at Miami.
Yeah,
like
I said that last week. This is going to be a great test subject of results on the field versus if all this reports of NIL are going to be spent and there's heavy money involved for Florida, what's the dynamic going to be between the two of money, and results on the field?
This is fundamentally actually why the Napier retention and the vote of confidence and all that stuff actually bother me more than anything. It's because the Florida team has no identity. And there's nowhere where I can point to in the program where Florida is differentiated over another program out there. Like, when it comes to NIL, we're going to spend a bunch of money. Texas A&M's been spending money on NIL for 4 years. So all you've really done is said, hey, we're going to catch up with all these other guys who are out there. And I'm like, that's great. Like it's better than what it has been, obviously, but all it's going to do is help catch you up with everyone else. Now, the question I have, and I don't know that we'll know the answer to this because they don't give out contracts and NIL numbers and those sorts of things. The only time we know is when something gets screwed up, then we usually know how much somebody's making. But therein, again, the Rashada aspect, like I actually have no problem with the PR and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it sucks, but like the problem with the Rashada saga is that they offered him $14 million. And money is not like money's fungible. If you use it for one player, you can use it for another, or if you don't use it for one player, you can use it for another. So do I have confidence that this staff understands how to value players in a way where they will be, and they're going to have to outbid some people, but you don't have to outbid them by $36 million.
Yeah.
Like, you need to outbid them by.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you just need to outbid them by some amount, right? And so I remember the rumors going around where that Rashada was like 8 or 8.5 million, and all of a sudden it's 14. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like 8 or 8.5 was way too much. 14 is ludicrous. And so again, I go back to, it's like when everybody's like, well, we get up at 4 a.m. and lift weights. So does everybody else out there. You haven't gained any differentiation by having a strength coach who doesn't have you doing yoga. Like you've now just caught up to everyone else. And so that's my big concern with all of this stuff, is that Florida is essentially saying, well, we're going to use the buyout money and catch up to everybody else. But now you're doing it in a situation where the thing you have to sell is you are a mercenary coming to the University of Florida to help save Billy Napier's job. And if you don't play well as a mercenary, well, then Napier's going to be gone, and the coach that you committed to isn't going to be here any longer. It's going to take extra money to get somebody to do that over some of these other programs that he might be able to go to. So, look, if they'd have said, we don't want to buy out Billy Napier, here's what the buyout would be 3 years ago, then I'd be like, cool, like everybody was aligned at that point. But this idea that we're going to justify not getting rid of him because we can reallocate those funds someplace else, to me just means congratulations. You've now caught up to Alabama in terms of overall funds. Napier needs to be meeting 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week on whatever's going on in the transfer portal. Because, I mean, honestly, and we've seen it already, like basically you've got half the fan base who looks at it and goes, well, we just got blasted by Texas. Everything's hopeless. And then you got the other half of the fan base that goes, well, we just got blasted by Texas. Must have been the injuries. Like,
yeah,
like, I mean, if he went 0-3 for the rest of the games this year, does it change the way people feel about the program overall? I mean, I guess 4-8 would change the way some people would think.
And losing to this Florida State team?
I mean, I think it would ramp up the noise, but if you're keeping him till next year,
yeah,
The only thing that matters is what happens next year.
Right.
And I know he's not necessarily going to say this in the press conference, but I hope behind the scenes it's 6 hours a day on transfer portal, 2 hours a day on football preparation, because it looks like they're only spending 2 of every 8 hours on football preparation anyway when it comes to special teams and having 12 guys on the field and all that sort of stuff, which, and they need the transfer. Like, that has to be a place that they hit, which unfortunately means they're probably going to ignore the 2025 recruiting class at the high school level in terms of having those funds allocated. And that is one of my worries.
Because it has to be instant impact. Like,
well, exactly. And the only way you do that is with 5-star guys, and all the 5-star guys have already committed.
Yeah.
So unless you're going to come in off the top rope and start offering these 5-star guys, like, we'll know. I mean, if they end up with 4 5-stars in the 2025 class, we'll be like, oh, that money got allocated properly, or at least it got allocated on the proper players. I don't know if it got allocated completely properly, but you're going to have to flip some guys early signing day, the same way guys got flipped last year. But again, this was one of the things I wrote in my article about Napier's retention is that if you look at the guys who flipped from Florida, Xavier Filsaime was the best player who got flipped from Florida's class, and he was 39th overall. You're not flipping the 4th guy in the country on the last day with an NIL offer at this point. Ohio State is offering the same amount of money that you are. And so you got to offer Ohio State plus. Either that's plus money, plus playing time.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Right, that's what I was going to say earlier. There's a Florida tax right now because of the results on the field.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have
Napier tariff.
Yeah, you're going to have to overspend. That's just how it is.
Yeah. So maybe 45 million instead of 23 is what we need to round out this class. I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong tab there. And Big Blue comes up to this. He brings up a good point, and everybody has said it about Florida State and all that. Because you cannot build long-term success in the portal. You have to recruit and win at the high school battle. At the high school level, we've been saying that for years. The hole's dug too deep now, where you have to attack the transfer. That's his only way out of this. Like, yes, there's a young nucleus of players. We've all admitted that. We know that. That young nucleus is not winning Florida 9-10 games next year. That young nucleus plus a really, really good portal haul is what's going to win the 9-10 games next year if that's on the table. So Napier's dug the hole where he has to. The high school recruiting hadn't been good enough. So now he has to turn to the transfer portal. And that's why so many of us begged early on in the process was hit the transfer portal to get the wins early, and then the high school recruiting can take over. Now, to me, yeah, it is a little bit backwards, and maybe if you can start putting some wins together, and if it's a 2-year plan with enough wins next year, you get that, and you can start building your high school recruiting back up. But the way this thing is played out, he has to hit the transfer portal to have some success next year.
Well, and this is where I think people need to be careful, especially those people who are making an argument that they don't want to start over again.
Yeah.
Because I think the concern that I have is that if you go whole hog on the portal, but you neglect your 2025 class, the whole rationale for not wanting to start over again is that you don't want to have that 2025 class fall apart with a transition to a new coach, and that new coach is an unknown. At the same time, I look at it and I go, you're going to neglect the 2025 high school class because of the transfer portal class that you have to bring in anyway. And so if you have to make a change after this year or after next year, then you'll be looking at a neglected 25 class plus a transition 26 class. And it's even worse, right? You sort of just kick the can down the road. The other thing is we don't have to look too far. You got to look about 2 hours northwest of Florida to see what happens when you have a quarterback papering over all the holes that you're able to sort of fill up those holes with transfer portal guys. And then all those guys leave along with the quarterback. And oh boy, what happens to a program then? The bottom has completely fallen out in Tallahassee. And it was completely foreseeable because the exact same thing happened, right? They allocated all of their NIL funds, all of their emphasis, all of that stuff on the transfer portal. And Jordan Travis was good enough to cover up a bunch of those holes. I mean, a couple of years ago when Travis was running all over the place, when Florida seemed to have him sacked 30 times that game, and he's running all over. That's a game Florida should have won.
Yeah.
And they didn't win because of Jordan Travis, because Jordan Travis was playing quarterback. And when Travis got injured, we saw what happened to Florida State last year on the offensive side of the ball, the last couple of games, and certainly in that game against Georgia. And now we've seen what happens this year. They bring in Yui Agalele, who is not a terrible player, but he's like Nussmeier. He's below average overall, and he's a game manager. And you bring in a game manager with substandard high school recruits who didn't get any playing time because the transfers were in there taking up all the playing time. And all of a sudden, what do you have? You have a really young team with substandard quarterback play. That quarterback gets injured and the whole season goes to hell. And so, look, I think that there is something to be said for going and absolutely whole hog on the transfer portal because of where Billy Napier's at. But there's a moral hazard here. And you see this all the time with general managers who are about to get fired in the NFL or in Major League Baseball or any other professional sport, where they go on like a spending spree before the season starts because they know they're gone and don't have to deal with the ramifications of the contracts. Because if they don't win, now if they win, then they got to deal with the ramifications of the contracts. So Mike Norvell gets his extension this offseason, and now he's got to deal with the ramifications of selling his soul to the devil last year in order to get that 13-1 season. But he got the extension, right? He was able to get what he needed in order to do it. If Florida State had gone 8-5 last year, there's no way he survives this season. Right. And so that's the calculus right now for Billy Napier and Scott Strickland in some ways too. But there's a moral hazard here where these guys are going to mortgage the future because they have to win now. And yeah, you can't build a program long-term that way. That just happens to be the corner that Billy Napier is putting himself in and has put himself in, not because of what's happened now, not because the fans have gotten loud at the lack of wins, but because of exactly what you said, that they were slow on the transfer portal to start with, that they were not elite at the high school recruiting level to start with, that they've been slow on NIL overall, that they've had some snafus with NIL overall, and the high school recruiting hasn't been there at an elite level. The transfer portal, they've been somewhat effective there, but that has not been, they don't have massive game changers who've come out of the transfer portal. And, it's just the risk profile of this program. It's like redlining right now. And my worry is you pour all this money in there. All of a sudden the engine's going to break. And when the engine breaks, Billy Napier ain't going to be here to clean it up. You're going to have somebody else here to clean it up.
That's the thing. What choice does he have?
Well, Napier has no choice. The program has a choice.
That's true. Well, with the decision already made, that's just stressful.
Look, people respond to incentives.
Yeah.
And so if I was in Napier's situation right now and somebody handed me $25 million to spend and said, you get to stay here if you win next year and you're gone if you don't, what am I doing? Like, it's obvious what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and try to find, essentially a Graham Mertz at every position, right? The guy who's a fifth-year guy who's going to come in and is going to be able, and I know he's a solid guy and he's going to be able to. Now that might be my concern too, is that Graham Mertz is a perfect quarterback for a system that has Alabama level talent around it. I think for a team like Florida, Graham Mertz is not the perfect fit for that because of that. And so I'd say the same thing at middle linebacker, corner, safety. Like, Florida is not devoid of guys who are good teammates, good culture guys, guys who work hard in the weight room, like those sorts of things. I don't think what Florida's devoid of is Sean Taylor. Like, they don't have a guy at safety who just changes the game. They don't have a guy at linebacker who just changes the game. They don't have a guy at defensive end who just changes the game. And you don't have to look too far. Ole Miss had a guy whipping around the corner the other day against Georgia who was a Gator at one time or another. And
I was told he wouldn't be missed. And I was so against that, but
it turns out when you lose your best pass rusher, even if he's not perfect, that does have an impact.
Yeah. All right, let's get to a little bit of recruiting news, Will, before we sign off here. Gators get a commitment from the nation's top kicker or nation's top two kicker, whichever service you look at Evan Noel, or Noel, I don't know how he says it there. But from the state of Mississippi, as I said, one of the top kickers in the country, flipping from Arkansas, where he's been committed for about a year. 12th commitment of the 2025 class that now gets Florida to 45th on the 24/7 Sports Composite. Billy Napier was asked about recruiting today and the uncertainty around his job affecting it.
When it comes to recruiting, to what extent do you think the uncertainty is playing a role in that?
Yeah.
And has it changed? I mean, what impact will it have now that you have this vote of confidence?
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the uphill battles that we faced, to be quite honest. Probably the only one, to be honest with you. And I think ultimately we're hopeful over the next month or so that really 65 days, I think, before the winter acquisition period is over, whether that's high school or portal. So about 60 days or so where we'll be working extremely hard to add good players to the team. But, yeah, I mean, I think it definitely helps.
Definitely helps, Will, that the announcement from Scott Strickland last week will, apparently help put a bow on this class in the next 65 days or so, says Billy Napier. Will they add players? For sure. Quality of players, that's still going to be hugely in question. As you said, we may get an inclination if the NIL dollars are there that they might put a better finish on this class. And look, Auburn's losing players. FSU will certainly be losing players with the coaching changes going on there. So certainly some movement to go on from programs that are struggling out there, much like Florida was last year. If you were recruiting well, the results on the field are still going to matter somewhat. Does money matter? Absolutely. The win-loss record still matters too. As I said, Florida gets a kicker today, but Billy Napier did say, kind of just go into it. Yeah, it did affect this. Certainly it should. If guys were questioning going to Florida, if they were committed to Florida, we've already seen a string of decommitments since the season had started. Some of that due to results on the field. I do think some of it dealing with if Billy Napier was going to be here or not. It's going to be interesting to see the close to this class and just how. If there's any admission by some of the commitments out there that, the reason I'm coming now is because Billy Napier is going to be here, or a storyline along that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the most important commit in all of this is DJ Lagway, who liked who immediately liked Strickland's comment.
Yeah,
and Florida has no hope without Lagway at quarterback next year. And so, irrespective of what happens in the 2025 class or what happens in the transfer portal, to me that was the biggest recruit, right? Because I think Strickland made the strategic decision that if he stayed and he got rid of Napier and he hired a new coach and DJ Lagway was winning a national championship at Ohio State, that was not going to be something that was palatable for anyone, regardless of what the record was at Florida. Like Florida might even go 10-2, and it wouldn't matter if Lagway was up late, he was lighting it up at Texas A&M or Alabama or Ohio State. So I think that's the number one recruit overall, right? And then yeah, you're going to have to work at the margins. You're going to have to get some things where you go, okay, like, I don't know how much you got to pay for a kicker, but kickers clearly have value. We've seen that over the course of the last few years. And so having specialists who give you an edge, that's very useful. And it probably doesn't cost you a whole lot to get that, right? And, so to get somebody to flip from Arkansas, have him come here, good. And I will say that the transfer portal works both ways, right? Like it used to be that if you, I can remember this happened at the end of Bobby Bowden's career, where the opposing programs were basically saying, don't commit to Florida State because Bowden might transfer or Bowden might retire. And that was a legitimate concern for a guy because he couldn't transfer. But now if you come to a program where a guy's guaranteed to be there next year, well, whatever. If he gets fired, you just transfer, right? Yeah. Like you haven't given up anything overall. Like you haven't locked yourself into a program for 4 years in the same way that you used to. And so in many ways, I think the transfer portal obviously causes complications for coaches who are trying to manage their roster. At the same time, I think it probably provides some opportunities for a coach who is on the hot seat to recruit in a little bit different way. Right. And essentially say, look, if they let me go, I'll shake your hand as you walk out the door, but don't go over there just because you're afraid that you'll get stuck at this place without me. Like that won't happen. You'll have the freedom to leave if you do. So to me, if I was Napier, that's the story I'd be telling is I'd be like, look, if you can help turn this ship around at Florida, think about the number of co-eds who are going to be coming over to say hi to you when this whole ship turns around, and think about how special it'll be to turn it around. Whereas if you're just another cog in the wheel at Georgia, that they've already won national championships. They are now at the stage where the fan base expects them to win. and that they're 7-2 right now, and the sky is falling after that loss to Ole Miss for the Bulldogs right now. Whereas Florida would go 7-2 with a loss to Ole Miss, like I'll take it.
Yeah.
Give me that in a second, right? And so there are some things that you can sell. And by knowing he's going to be here next year, you can actually sell them legitimately.
Yeah.
As opposed to going, I don't know, I might be gone in December, but sure, come here and commit next year, right? Like that's a hard sell to make. So given what we know about Napier, given how genuine he seems to be with these guys, given how much the guys love him, it does seem like having that year, having guarantees he'll be here next year, even if he's going to tell the story like that, which is come here for a year, see what you can do.
Yeah.
And if I happen to go, go. Like I will support you and, give you a letter of recommendation to whatever program you want to go to next. That's still a more effective sales pitch than commit to me in November and I might be gone in 3 weeks. So,
there's 12 commitments right now. I think when you look at this class, it's probably one that finished with 16, 17 commitments. If you're going to save money, save roster space for your transfers that are going to, make a huge impact for this team. I don't know how many Florida will add in the next 60 days or so, but certainly got to. I think the biggest storyline is what's going to be the fallout from FSU staff changes and who becomes it. Solomon Thomas, of course, his name, the 5-star offensive lineman out of Jacksonville, one of the top targets coming from. He's still committed, but did put out a social media tweet today that did not seem so favorable for Florida State, and Atkins getting fired. Also, of course, Tramel Jones, the quarterback, committed there. Flip rumors of him flipping from FSU to Florida. And this is even before the announcement for Billy Napier to stay on as Florida's coach. So, two right there. I think a lot of competition for Solomon Thomas, Miami, LSU come to mind as well. But, you got to start looking at how Florida will put a finish on this. And, who knows what the next few weeks hold on the field and if that will affect who Florida can get. But certainly we can talk recruiting a little bit during the season.
we are allowed. I'm glad he didn't answer the question by being snarky and just dismissing it. Napier knows this is a talent acquisition business, and he's got some challenges, I'm sure, behind the scenes in terms of getting everybody aligned that no one has ever had when it's come to the University of Florida specifically. Now, I will say that Georgia has had to navigate its way through these sorts of things, but Smart had already established himself as a high-level coach before that happened. I think Lanning and Cristobal are probably the closest ones when you compare that, and I think they've done a better job of dealing with these sorts of things, though certainly Cristobal's had some on-field gaffes that rival some of the ones that Napier has had. And look, if Miami hadn't gotten Cam Ward in the transfer portal, where are they right now?
Yeah.
I mean, given all the close games they've played this year and that sort of stuff. So one of the things that we do see at the college level is that an elite quarterback goes a long way towards being an effective team. And if Lagway comes out next year and lights it up, he's not transferring someplace else to play a third year to then go to the pros. Like if he's lighting it up next year, he's going to be here for his second and third year. And if he's not lighting it up next year, well, then Napier's gone and he's going to transfer and you're right where you were. So again, I think there are legitimate reasons why Florida has decided to take the tack that they have. I disagree with it fundamentally, but
sure,
that has more to do with my goal. So my goal is long-term sustained excellence. And I don't think that you get there by putting this moral hazard in the way for Billy Napier. But I would not be surprised if Florida is able to put the pieces in place to make a real run at it next year, or at least, and maybe this is the caveat I should put on all this, at least be competitive in every game that they play next year. Because the Napier experience thus far, at least in 2024, is not just disappointing because Florida's 4-5. I picked Florida to go 6-6. I expected them to be kind of an average football team. What I didn't expect was for them to just get blown out in the first half repeatedly over and over and over again. And so just competitive games where every week I don't know whether Florida is going to win or lose this game, would be a welcome change to what we've seen thus far. And hopefully they'll be able to get that done with the strategy they're taking and the money they're putting in the program.
All right, there we go. We'll have plenty of off-season talk for that angle. How many wins would be enough, and all that kind of good stuff for sure.
14.
Yeah, there we go. Will's answer on November 11th. Florida needs 14 wins in 2025. So, hey, a lot of people will agree with you on that, by the way. You're 4. Yeah. There we go. Good stuff, Will. I like the conversation tonight. You text me this morning. What are we going to discuss tonight? I was like, even at the time, I didn't know. Let's hear what Billy Napier has to say. I know we'll talk about the defense, of course, because of that performance and where you were writing at readreaction.com about it. So we always figure these things out.
Well, I mean, look, I'm never someone who struggles to find things to say. Like, I think, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, we were like, hey, can we have medium Will for this episode? I want to go to bed tonight. So never really struggle in that respect. But I mean, the thing is, I've had people messaging me all year long where they're like actively sort of, they want to see Napier go, and so they're definitely straddling the fence, or maybe even actively in the camp of wanting the team to do poorly. I just can't get there. Like, I want my team to do well. I want to root for them. I want it to work. And so, I've sort of gone through the 5 stages of grief when it comes to the decision to bring Napier here, and I still don't like it. Like, I still think that it's the wrong decision. But I'm at least coming around to acceptance and saying, okay, well, now that this is the reality, what do we need to do? And what are the things that the administration needs to stop him from doing, right? There might be some times where the folks who are signing the checks need to step in and go, wait. We're about to spend $4 million on a backup corner. Like what's going on here? Like, we can get a 5-star recruit for this, right? And Napier's going to be like, I don't want the 5-star recruit. He's not going to contribute this year. You're like, well, wait a minute. So hopefully there's some checks and balances there that keep everything going. And the good news is that I do think that Napier is going to want to leave the program in good standing, even if he's unsuccessful. So hopefully that plays into is that there is an integrity piece to it, where you look at it, you go, yeah, I could bring in this 3rd string corner, and that might buy me a win downstream. When 2 guys get injured, but it's not the right thing to do for the program. So I'm gonna change tacks. I think Napier's that kind of guy. Hopefully he is. And if there's an opportunity to allocate things elsewhere, he'll do that.
All right, Will Miles, fighting him out there at Will Miles SEC on X, Twitter, or whatever you want to call it. I know we still go through that. I'm still calling it Twitter. Will, LSU, I'll have Blake Ruffino on this week on the podcast, as I do every year for LSU. Will, I can't wait to see you this weekend, by the way, too. Will, as you heard, coming down for the LSU game. So if you want to say, hey, I don't know what time he'll be at Harmonic Woods for a little bit. He always stops by. So
Max is already asking. So Max has 2 things in mind. I've been waiting to actually, so my family usually goes as a group. So I've been waiting to buy tickets because I kind of knew the price was going to go down over these last 2 weeks. And then the other part is that all Max has asked is, Dad, are we going to the party before? And I'm like, yes, son. Yes, we are. So last year I brought a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper. And the mayor told him he could have whatever he wanted over at the food tent. And oh man, he was like a pig and slop, dude. Just like
I lost count on how many cookies I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah. Mom was not around, and he got everything he wanted. So it was a blast. So he's looking forward to it. So yeah, man, it'll be great to see you. Great to see everybody down there. Stop by the Harmonic Woods tailgate if you want to say hey. And obviously we appreciate everybody who listens to us. So always good to put a face with the comments over the right hand side. You can tell me that you were the one blasting me last week. I'd appreciate it.
There we go. Will Miles, find him at readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. Find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of Gators Breakdown.